Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. This is Teaching Liberty to Live Free. You have to think free. And that is exactly what we do here on this show. And I'm going to really need you to open your mind up for this one because this history is crazy. They say that truth is like more insane than fiction, and that is definitely true in this case. This is one of those stories when I first heard it, I was like, let me go fact check that. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it's actually true. So I'm here with Amaya, the New York chapter leader for Gays Against Groomers, and we're going to go through the history of John Money, who is known as the spiritual father of transgenderism. It's quite a title there. And then we're going to connect it to today and really how this has proliferated into a full ideology that has infected our whole culture. And of course, Amaya, you are really on the front lines of advocacy in this line with Gays Against Groomers. You wrote a great article on that, so we're going to be talking about that. But first, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Hey, like I've been better. Like I said, it is tax day. So it was a little bit of a I did my taxes a little bit last minute. Got that number today and I was like, oof.
Yeah, it's depressing when you see it.
I put up that tweet. I was like, what is the 2024 version of the Boston Tea Party, right? Of dumping
Right?
tea into the harbor? Can
Can we
somebody
get
let
to
me know?
it?
Yeah. Um But anyways, tonight we are here to talk about something that has certainly got people out in the street, right?
Yup.
Both
Yup.
those claiming to support it and those who were trying to stand up against it. And so I guess let's go ahead and get into this. If you're checking in, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here. Let us know in the comments. Do you know about this history of John Money? And, I mean, I meet people all the time who I tell this story to, and they're like, "I had no idea." So this is definitely a video I think to share out. I got this article here from Gays Against Groomers, and it's pretty short and it summarizes the history. I mean, you can go down some deep, dark rabbit holes on this topic, but I thought it would just be a good resource. And actually, Gays Against Groomers has this whole section of news, op-eds, all sorts of cool resources. So I definitely recommend them. Check them out. Amaya, I know people can reach out to you, right?
Yep. Yep. You guys
Um,
can reach out directly to me. Um,
exactly. So, John Money, right? Here he's called the godfather of gender identity and a pedophile apologist. And I know a lot of times when we hear that term pedophile or groomer, it can sometimes be overused or watered down in the culture. But in this case,
it's not.
it's real.
It's very
So
real.
and this is a picture of him right here, just looks like a regular old person, just looks like
Right?
a professor.
You would never know.
So modern discussions and of gender often include statements like sex and gender are different or gender is something you identify as. But where did these ideas originate? And it's such a basic question, but
And it-
literally nobody ever stops to ask it.
Never. No one's curious ever. So where all this comes from? They just accept it as truth. And I'm just like, that was my first question when I learned all about this. I'm like, where did this?
Who came up with
Who
this idea?
who came up with
Right?
this?
I feel like people try to jump back further in history and just try to be like, oh, all throughout time, like different cultures have expressed gender in different ways. And like, that's definitely true. Right. But
Yeah.
I also think it uses that as cover for something that is way, way different.
No, absolutely. Like you said, it has existed throughout history. People have expressed themselves in different ways, but what this is doing is completely different than
Right. And
expression.
certainly I'm sure it throughout history there have been other incidents of things that aren't so great, including pedophilia, right? We definitely know that as well.
Yep.
Um, but I feel like they try to hide under the more just, people are different and they have different things in society. I mean, like we used to have these things called tomboys here in the United States.
Once upon a time.
Yeah. All right, well, let's keep going. So, while many attribute it to feminists, the first person to use gender in such a way was John Money in 1955, which really isn't that long ago. My mom was born in 1956.
Wow.
So, this is like a new phenomenon.
Very new.
He's often referred to as the father of gender identity, since he is the one who invented the term. While John Money is mostly famous for his work on transgenderism and the infamous John Reamer case, which we'll talk about in a second, he actually has an extensive history of sexological research that is controversial, to say the least. Scarily enough, his ideas are currently being replicated through the current conversation about sex and gender. So, just like laying some groundwork here, the David Reamer case, we're gonna get into a little bit more down here, but the really quick summary version of it is that there were two twins, and that one of them had a botched circumcision, and he he I believe he was having trouble then like going to the bathroom, like it became a problem, and so they were trying to figure out what to do, and they went to the University of Ohio, and they were like, "Oh, well, you're just gonna have to give him a sex change surgery and like grow him up as a girl." And so these two twins, they were both biological males, but they converted one and treated them as a female. And ultimately, they grew up and committed suicide. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, yeah.
all
But,
came from all came from just like an accidental mess up in a circumcision. The parents came to actually, saw John Money on television and was just like, yeah, he's a sexologist. And why, for some
right,
reason, felt like his medical expertise meant that he would know what the best to do. And they told him, oh, you should get surgery for your kid so he feels more normal. Uh,
right. Well, he was built up as this expert, right?
yeah,
He's the expert, there's not really anything else to do. It's how he can or she can grow up to have a normal life. And these twins weren't the only one. They're sort of like the most famous case, but he was doing a bunch of different research in this realm that was kind of like used as evidence to support this, right? So, like, this wasn't it's some I mean, I guess maybe within academia, maybe it was like a new cutting in edge and kind of fringe, but because it was within that institutional you're at a university. So very much how it is today, right?
exactly.
It's in children's hospitals and at your doctor's office and in your school, all these mainstream places. It gets this air of being like more normal than it is.
Yeah, because people trust experts, right? You're
Right.
taught in society that if they are an expert, they know best, and no
Right.
questioning.
Right. No questioning, right? And that's the problem is like there certainly are experts. There's definitely things that I'm not able to do. I'll never, like I have to get my oil changed and my car, tuned up. And there's certainly people who can do that on their own. But it's just not something at this point in my life where I'm like the opportunity cost is there to like figure out how to do all these things. I'll take it to my guy to the shop. But at the same time, sometimes when you go to these places and they tell you you have to do a million things, you're like, I don't know, man. It doesn't seem,
Exactly.
you have to find the people who you trust and you have to vet them and you have to ask questions.
Exactly.
And certainly for this. All right, so let's keep going back into the article. So it says, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger, I feel like. Oh wait, I'm on the wrong screen. Boom. I don't know if that actually did anything.
Oh,
Um Okay, so John Money's work on the sexual citizenship of children has earned him the title of pedophile advocate, and rightfully so. His work, Chronophilia, described an erotic attraction of people to different age groups. These age groups included minors, not surprisingly, and he tried to normalize this for years despite not being scientific evidence that exists whatsoever. In 1994, he opposed the classification of pedophilia as an abnormal fetish, even though, right, there's overwhelming research to show it is. And so basically, you can go through and find all these different quotes about the sexual liberation of children, right? In the
Yeah.
broader cultural purview of sexuality timetables. Like, and again, these are, it just sounds so familiar to a lot of the things that we hear out there today. I mean, no
Yeah.
kidding you. Recently, I saw something about how to talk about like self pleasure.
Yeah, that's exactly actually a part of some sex ed curriculums now that they're talking to kids about masturbating.
Right, and these were like, this wasn't, like, high school kids or whatever, which is still, like, weird, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean,
it's, like, definitely way past the line of just, like, basic anatomy and, like, here's how you put on a condom and access basic reproductive healthcare services in, a professional medical setting or whatever. It's that's just weird.
no, now we got books instructing on how to give blowjobs and a variety of things now that you can know how to use sex toys if you want. Like,
Right. And,
oh,
like, usually I'm against, like, drawing, like, straight lines in history from one event to another, but I do think that this is one of those cases where you can really draw a straight line from John Money to the proliferation of, um, this gender ideology and the way that has impacted our culture.
yeah, it's a direct link. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, here's some other quotes too, just to like to show some more evidence for these things, right? In the 1980s, his work uh um included a resurrection of psychosexual age, a term from the 1950s that Money rebranded as sexual erotic age. That same year, he advocated for erotic role play, I don't know, suggesting that some people have an inner child, making them attracted to minors. That is something that should be accepted and encouraged. And even though he did not, yeah, scientific proof, again, chronophilia. So it's like a palatable rebranding. I think that's a good term for this. Trying to
Mhm.
rebrand things that we've known are wrong.
Exactly. Yes. Now you're seeing it with like the trans age thing with people who are like to wear listen, do what you want to do in the privacy of your home, but everything has a reason, right? There's people wearing diapers and pretending to be babies. Like this is stuff that he used to talk about, and now we're like normalizing it. Like this is what he
Okay.
wanted.
Yeah,
Crazy.
trans age. People can be any age. Yeah. And it's like once you break down this notion that the biological sex that you're born is is malleable, right? You can
Hmm.
change it to wherever you want and just sort of deny reality in that way, then it really is pretty simple to then just like go over and deny reality in other categories such as age.
Right. Exactly. It's just a stepping stone.
So, I really highly encourage people to go look into the history. Like, you really need to deep dive into this guy, and the David Reamer case. I actually do think more people have heard about this case, of the twins of David Reamer, but they don't actually get too much into the doctor, John Money, right? They
Mm.
just sort of focus on the fallout of the twins, which I find is obviously like we want to like hear their story and all that, but I do think that there's not ever enough focus on actual John Money.
No, no one ever really talks about him or like really addresses the fact that without him, we wouldn't really be where we're at all. At all. Like he really tried to normalize the sexualization of kids in a variety of ways. And now we're seeing it. Now people are just accepting it. And nice little bow now it's just gender ideology. It's just like, wow. He would be so happy that his work is being continued.
Right. And there's some interesting connections also too with like pop culture and this stuff, especially with um who was the Playboy guy?
Hugh Hefner.
Hugh Hefner, right? There's some interesting crossovers there. This is the twin, David Reamer, who was the one who had eventually a tragic end, committed suicide. This is, I guess, when he was a child and his parents were dressing him as a girl. And they talk about the reason again with the he had it was something wrong, like his foreskin wouldn't retract or something. And yeah, physmosis was the condition. And so they went to go get circumcised and it just like went really wrong,
That's horrible.
you know?
And he like basically transitioned and then tried to detransition and realizing like you can't go back once you get it cut up. He committed suicide, like unfortunately, and many other people who detransition.
Yeah, right? And that's always the most insidious lie I think of all, right?
Yeah,
Because that's sort of like really the thing that that's like the chopping block that they hold up. They're like, if you don't comply with this ideology and the things we're saying you need to do for your child, they're going to commit suicide.
oh yeah, that's the first threat. Oh, if you don't, do you want a dead child or do you want a trans child? Is what they bring to parents. And as a parent, like as someone who would want to be a parent, I could not possibly think in my mind like what I would do if someone threatened my like, oh, my kid's gonna kill themselves. Well, I'm gonna do whatever it takes. That's what a lot of parents their mindset is, and they aren't being informed about the actual things. They're being told that this is just reversible. You can reverse puberty blockers. You can reverse sterilization. Can't can't reverse it. It's permanent. 100%.
Right. And this is on full grown adults, right? These
Yeah.
tactics work on full grown adults. I mean, they're extremely coercive tactics, right?
Yeah.
I'm not blaming anybody who these tactics work on. I mean, it's abusive
Yeah.
tactics and people, good parents who just want to do what's best for their kids find themselves in these situations where they're genuinely trying to help and they're coerced by people doing this. And I think a lot of times too, like the people who are pushing this, like some of them for sure, like you find groomers and people who are sick and really messed up. But I think a lot of the people who are pushing this also are being taken advantage of. Right.
100%.
And they think that this really genuinely is the best thing.
Yeah, they are. You have to believe what you're selling, right? Like if you but that's when it comes down to like the whole my article with the whole school thing because it starts small. Like you're taught from very young age, but not even that. Just the doctors who go to school in college. I'm in college. I'm supposed to be a nurse. Um, trying to be. I'm being taught that yes, you can change your sex. That yes, that puberty blockers are reversible, knowing that I know that's not true. But if you're a doctor and not in the circles that we're in, you're automatically going to assume all that's being taught is truth. So then you're going to push it, and then you believe the lies, and then when
Wait, like what kind of course are they teaching nurses that you can change your biological sex in, or they don't do they don't say you could change your biological sex, they can say how you present your
oh
sex to
no,
the
they
world,
teach
or
they teach us. We had the paper I wrote. It's for a culture and diversity course, which was a required course for my nursing degree for no reason. So they'll teach it in that way. They won't say, oh, you can physically change someone's sex. They'll say, "Oh, you need to accept and include all members of society that like, a trans individual, like you just call them by their name, by their pronouns. You can't acknowledge their biological sex and treatment." I've taught like medical law about how like that I have to follow that I could get in trouble for breaking, um, patient privacy if I disclose their actual sex, like those things. Like it's engulfed in our medical industry in a different way. Also, with actual doctors learning about how to transition kids, they're being taught lies that these like procedures, puberty blockers are actually reversible, and they're telling their patients that. That's the only reason why they're telling them that. So like there,
So crazy.
it starts off very small, and you would think smart people wouldn't follow this stuff, but if you're taught it, you just taught it, you believe it.
Right. I mean, yeah, we saw that in the pandemic too, right? Like, I've really come to learn that intellect and uh I don't know what to necessarily call it, like your meter for bullshit, I guess. Like
Yeah,
those two things are often very separate things. Like I know some people, like they're not really the brightest people, like you know what I mean?
yeah,
Um they're cool, but they have like an excellent bullshit meter where, like they don't
exactly.
take any bullshit. And then like I know some people who are super smart, like if I
Mhm.
have certain problems or need to understand some technical thing, I might go to them. But like, they're following the rules.
Yeah, like common sense and intelligence aren't the two things. So you
Yep.
really people I'm not shocked. I have had classmates that repeat this BS, and I'm just like, can you just think about what we're learning? Like why that just
Right,
doesn't make sense? Like you have to put
right.
the pieces together.
So, and again, these are very smart, intelligent people, probably good people, right? Again, this
Mhm.
isn't a personal thing against anybody, but
No.
if that's how people who are really smart, who are adults, can be impacted by this stuff, imagine America's youth. And so that I wanted to bring us to your article here. And we don't have to read it in the same way that we did that one. I mean, we have you, the author, here, but I do encourage people to head over to Gays Against Groomers website in the radar section. And if you just type in this title, The Negative Impact of Queer Theory on America's Youth, it'll pop right up and you can get all the goodness in here. It has sourcing at the bottom, like a good college student.
What?
So so yeah, tell us, we talked a little bit about this history, John Money, where this stuff came from. We showed people the quotes. And I mean, if you're on the internet and paying attention, you probably know a little bit how it's impacting the youth. Probably more so if you have kids than not. But even some people who have kids, right? Parents who have kids don't even understand the extent of it, don't want to, or they might think, oh, it's not really, in my school. Or they don't understand, like how you were telling me in nursing, the way that they often do it is indirectly, right? In
Yeah.
ways that on the surface, oh, it seems good. Like we're just inclusive, we're diverse here. So talk to me about how these ideas, which started in John Money and have proliferated out through academia, are really impacting today's youth.
All right, so it kind of starts back with queer theory and just where it came from. And the term was coined by this woman back in the 90s. Basically, it's a combination between gender and sexuality, and just like a mix of those two theories. And so, with that being said, queer theory kind of had its introduction in the last 10 years, to be honest, and most people haven't really been paying attention, but it's been happening throughout education, specifically with drag. And this is their new way of doing it after the pandemic. They realized the best way to get, like, because now, as you know, kids are more compliant. People are taught to just believe what they're taught. So now they've introduced new ways. So drag queens is one way, and drag queen story hour is one way. And there's this whole article I'm sure you can just post a link below. I'll send it to you later. It's It's about drag pedagogies, and it's basically about the ways drag can teach kids about queer theory. So one thing that, for example, they would teach is like to how like the importance of defiance, for example, like defying the gender norms, defining the heterosexual norms is how they'll envelope it, and how it's important to question the rules and sometimes break them. Mind you, they're teaching kids that are forming their idea that what you're supposed to do in society is more than 9 times out of 10, you should probably be a good member of society, follow the rules. Don't maybe not start a revolution, but a lot of these kids are being taught that revolution through drag, through expression, through self-expression, these drag queens are teaching them that it's a good thing, that you should revolt against the system. Now, as a person, I do agree the system is rigged, but when you're teaching kids to revolt it with things that aren't real, that's when it's a problem.
Right. I was
Right.
gonna say that. I was gonna say that, right? Because I was like, what's interesting is that I don't necessarily disagree with some of the ideas on their own, right? So I was I say the school system makes kids compliant, not critical thinkers, right?
Exactly.
So in that way, it's like we have a similar sort of criticism of the system, right? Well, we don't want our kids just to be these cookie cutter, things that are moving through a factory and spitting out facts or whatever. Um, but like you said, that doesn't mean that we need to have a drag queen revolution where all of a sudden we're denying that our biological
Right, like you're denying.
reality is as so. Um,
Exactly.
it's like throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly. They're teaching kids to throw away the system, right? But also teaching them not to think critically, which is dangerous. You're just giving them another cult to kind of latch onto. So yeah, they
right.
bring they bring the drag pedagogies in through queer theory. They teach it as well through gender studies. So they'll teach kids that like I did a recent video on New York's sex education with like HIV and everything, but they tie it into gender ideology. They're teaching kids that, a boy has a penis and a girl has a vulva. Okay, but a boy doesn't always have to have a penis. Sometimes he can have a vulva.
That's
And
so
like,
confusing.
it's
I'm
so
so
confusing,
confused.
right? And like you're teaching that to a 4 year old. Like they're starting at 4 teaching this stuff. So they'll introduce
Right.
queer theory into that along with drag queens. And then they'll have drag queen story hour. Well, they'll have drag queens come to schools reading about books to kids. In the surface, reading books to kids is not problematic. The problem is the fact that you're bringing an adult entertainer to do that, for one, and two, the books that they're reading. There was a book called like The Red Crayon or something, and talked about how it was like a red crayon, but he really felt like blue inside. And throughout the book, he is able to express himself, and he's really just a purple crayon. But little kid is learning, oh well, if I don't feel how I present on the outside, that I must have to, or in the inside, if I don't feel how I'm presenting on the outside, I have to change the outside.
Hmm.
You're teaching a little kid these things, and then they're having these adults who they don't vet in coming into schools, coming into public libraries, coming into all these different things. Sure, like I've saw at a dentist's office, they had a drag queen story hour for a celebration. Like literally anything you could think of, they're including it to try to plant seeds of confusion of identity into kids who are forming it. And then from there on, if you create a child who is confused with identity, they can't pay attention to the world around them. You're creating like a kid that can have some form of mental illness. A lot of the times, these kids then latch on to their confusion because now it's the cool thing to be trans, cool
Hmm.
thing to be non-binary. Now you're seeing all these girls, all these boys want to come out as, oh, I'm trans, I'm non-binary, and now you're seeing that they're focused on this dysphoria, this identity. That's not creating a strong-minded group of people. So
Right.
they can't last. They're not going to be adults that are actually going to be functional. They're going to be controlled adults who will
Yeah.
follow along the system.
And the thing that I always think about too is that you're going through this period in your life where you naturally have these confusions and these self-doubts and these anxieties, right? I mean, your body, when you're a kid, your body is constantly changing,
Yeah,
right?
repeated it.
Until for girls really in like 13, 12, 13, 14, boys until they're 18, 19, 20 sometimes, right? And so as your body is going through these different phases, you feel different ways about it. You have to constantly figure out like who you are and like how does your body work? And like I always think it's funny like when the boys like go through those growth spurts and they're like long and gangly and they like literally don't know how to use their like arms and legs. Um
Right.
and so it's like, that's just like a basic simple thing, but then when you scale that up to something that gets way more private, like, girls growing breasts and like boys starting to get, hair and like starting to have all these hormones rushing through your body and like, so you're like going through these phases and then it's already confusing. And then people come in and add confusion on top of that.
Yeah.
It's
They're like,
it's really it's at best it's messed up, at worst it's predatory.
no, yes, it's they're preying on things they know. So they know a child isn't going to be solidified in their identity. They know that. We all know that. But what they're doing is saying like every stage. So like if a boy is who may be flamboyant, right, or just be feminine, is going through puberty, and is like, I hate my body. I hated my body at certain points that they're going through puberty. I hated my boobs. Same thing with little girls being taught. You may be more tomboyish. You're a sports player, then all of a sudden you're going chest and you're like, what's going on? They're now teaching, like now they're saying, well, maybe because you present a little masculine as a girl, maybe you should kind of, explore that confusion, explore that stage instead of saying, hey, that's just what you're going to go through. That's just normal. Like everyone's going to go through that, whatever. Just it's going to be a process. You're 9 times out of 10, you're going to
Right,
be fine. That's not it anymore. Now they're like at every stage, they're solidifying it. That's who you are. That's who you are. And kids naturally look up to the adults who are in their life and they're like, they know me. Why would they say that that's not who I am? Maybe that is who I am. Then all of a sudden, now you're seeing girls who are coming out as non-binary and trans who may just be tomboyish, who may just have
right,
that moment in their time where they're like, I don't like my boobs. I didn't like them either. Like,
right.
you know,
Or it could
but
have
it's
nothing to do with your body, right? Like, there could be
exactly
something going on in your life, whether, your parents are getting a divorce or
that
whatever,
too.
like, your friend group, something happened in your friend group or whatever it is, like, there could be kids have all sorts of things going on, and
And
I think
trauma.
today there is just, like, the mental health crisis, which, I have my own opinions on what's, like, causing that and stuff, like, I don't think it's, um I think a lot of the people out there who are saying why we have a mental health crisis aren't exactly correct. But kids, they do. They're going through some like crazy stuff. They've got these screens in front of them all the time. They've got
Yeah.
access to way more like pharmaceutical drugs, and I think overall less kids are smoking marijuana from my understanding of the data, but also I feel like I've in my town I know that there's a lot of trouble cuz the kids can just smoke those vape pens wherever they want all the time, like whereas like when we were a kid, like you had to like skip school and like it was like a high cost to like
Yeah, you're like, you gotta
like
hide
now.
out to get to smoke
Exactly.
a little bit.
So, like, I just feel like there's, like, so many things going on in these kids' lives and, like, whatever, they can just, like, order food off of Uber Eats, and it's, like, such a crazy world to be a kid in. Um, yeah, and then you throw this other crazy thing on top of it,
Yeah,
so
it's like a perfect rainstorm, right? Like you're teaching, kids have access to this phone all day where they're seeing like this image of beauty, which we've went through in a different aspect with magazines, with television. It's always been a thing for girls, especially. And they're, food, hormones in their food, just everything kind of adds to that. And then you have school who wants to indoctrinate them into this type of theory. And then all of a sudden, now you're having this influx of people, identifying with the LGBT community, even if they're not, because now it's the new cool thing. Like, I remember recently learning something that was really interesting about, on a different separate podcast about how there was like this one period of time where women were taught that their uterus was like the reason why they're having emotional issues. So some women were having like postpartum depression, whatever the case may be. And then they were like, oh, it's your uterus. So what they would go to is go to the doctors and request a hysterectomy. And they think, oh, this is a solution. And sometimes like it did work, but 9 times out of 10, it wasn't the solution. And they were like, what's going on? And now, like, you see now, this is the same thing that we're going through with the gender
Just
reassignment
give them a
surgeries.
lobotomy. No
What
problem.
lobotomy? What's the problem? Just cut off your boobs. Why do you need them? What's the big deal? Like,
Oof.
that's exactly the same things we're going through now. And it's a rainstorm. That's what they want. They just want indoctrinated children so they can't think, so they can control them, because you can't control us anymore. You can't control the adults.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's like any regime that is tending more towards the totalitarian side of the equation, right? Using more coercion of the government to achieve their ends, uh, just naturally target the children because they know if they can win that generation, then there's not going to be as much pushback with things moving forward. I
Yeah.
mean, the same is true, though, I think, of even people who would claim to be a democracy, right? We need our kids
Mhm.
to be good citizens so they can grow up and like maintain that. So, again, anything, not anything, but like a lot of things can just be, right? Like they don't have to fundamentally be bad,
Right.
but they can be used as a cover to then do bad things. Um,
Absolutely.
and we see this too, like, a lot of people will be like, "Oh, it's so crazy that some guy, John Money would be a scientist and, like, try to make these into scientific principles." Like, that's so but we see it all the time with these predators. They get into positions that are socially acceptable, that get them status, that everybody around them looks up to them and says, "Oh, this is such a good person," and they use that as cover to then get close to their victims
Absolutely.
and even justify what they're doing.
Yep. That's exactly the plan. That's how predators work. It's just exactly how they just infiltrate wherever they're at, whatever,
Right. And I
be it
think it can be a
schools.
compulsion too, like, even just I think about the way, like, that addiction works and, like, drug addicts, it's like, sometimes, it's, or, like, food addictions and things like this, it's just like, you don't even have to, like, think about it. It's like you've already got your whole plan, how you're gonna get your thing, right? And it's no problem. I saw that meme. It's like, like a crackhead don't complain about how they're gonna get up and, get
Exactly.
their hustle out today or whatever. So yeah, I think a lot of times we're like, how do they even like, justify these things in your head? But if it's a compulsion, like you're not thinking critically about these things. Like you're just like,
No, you're thinking about how to get it.
right,
You just need access to it. That's it. And
exactly.
anything that lets you cover it up for as long as possible.
So what can people do, right? I feel like we've diagnosed the problem pretty well here, and not just in the sense of like talking about it from like a culture war point of view or this or that, but like we've dug back into the history. We've talked about like really how it's being applied to schools, but what can we actually do to stop it? Right? What can we do in order to push back against it in our schools and just the normalization in our culture?
Well, that's where using our voice comes in and not being afraid to be the bad person. I think a lot of the time, this is able to happen is because everyone in our society is so walking on eggshells and afraid to be that person who's going against the grain, that they're willing to let everything slide. So the best thing for everyone to do is, when you know something's not right, vocalize it. You may get those comments that are gross. You may get the hate. We get hate all the time. I get death threats. We get death threats. We get attacked. That's not stopping anything. And also, just be involved in your community is the biggest thing, I would say. You change your school boards. You have access to that. You're the ones who are paying the taxes to pay your kids to go to these schools. You've got to show up to those meetings. Don't care if those meetings are an hour after you get done. You show up to those PTA meetings, those school board meetings. You want to change legislation? Be aware of the laws that are happening around you. There's 3 big laws here in New York that are happening that are talking about education, that are talking about giving homeless kids, the ability to consent medically to
Mm,
all things. If you don't know these things, you're not going to be aware that
yeah,
you have the power to change it. So read up on your local legislation, see what is actually going to be voted on in November and what you can do. Go talk to your assembly, show up, pop up to them, to their offices. It's a public office. They have a right to speak to you.
right.
You have to speak to them.
I think a lot
So
of times too, just asking questions,
asking
right?
questions. Don't be
Because
afraid.
right, yeah, because a lot
Be
of
that
times
nosy
just be
parent.
like, why do you think or what is the criteria that we're using in order to judge whether a book is appropriate for my second grader, right? My fifth grader,
Exactly.
whatever it is. Like you can ask these questions that are pretty plain questions, right? Like you don't have to use any of this, gender ideology or whatever these buzzwords are. You can just say like, what are the standards for putting books or putting a lesson into our school? Why are we
Exactly.
teaching this lesson to our students? What is the value, right?
Exactly.
What are the test scores? What are the test scores? How is this helping our students who have a 23%, you know, competency rate at math?
Exactly.
Things like that. I think that you can ask questions that really make people in these positions of power have to squirm a little bit to justify it. I think one of the
Exactly.
most genius thing that people do is that when they have the books that are inappropriate for schools, right? They go and read them at the school board meetings. And a lot
Right.
of times the school board will be like, you can't read that in here because it's cursing or because it's, saying these sexually explicit things. They're like, I can't read it in here, but this is what my, ninth or 10th grader is reading or whatever.
Exactly. I did that at City Hall. I was like, there was a meeting about their basically a whole plot on what they're going to do about dealing with banded books that don't exist in New York City because there is no banded list and books aren't being banded here, but they're plotting because of other states. And I
Mm,
basically read out loud uh, I basically read up a whole book, a little bit of I forgot what it's called, gender queer, and
genderqueer, yeah.
just read the some pages of the instructionals, and I'm like, okay, so can you stand on this and then defend it as to why you think
Right,
this should not be banded? Can you explain
right.
to me what the benefit is? And asking questions is important as a parent. Be that nosy parent. That and when your kid gets home, hey, important questions. What was one interesting thing that you learned today? Did you learn anything that was out of the ordinary? Can I see some of your paperwork? Can I see some of your notes?
Oh, yes, go through the
Do
backpacks.
pop-ups. Go through backpacks. Go do those pop-ups to teachers. Send those emails. Go to school. 9 times out of 10, you're able to go in those classrooms if you have reason. Hey, I would love to know what my kid is learning. Hey, can I be on those PTA list? They will send you information.
Yeah. The
It's
class
there.
that you gotta look out for too, is the social emotional learning stuff,
Hmm.
because I know a lot of parents, the way that they sell it, right, with soft skills, a place where kids can work things out, and I actually am into advisors. Like I had an advisor, like an advisory when I was in high school, and we'd have lunch together like twice a week or whatever. And like that was the teacher who helped you make your schedule. And if you had any problems, they were sort of like help you mediate the situation. So that is great. But a lot of times the they're bringing in it's not just about what the kid sort of needs support with at that moment. There is like a curriculum that comes with it, and
Yeah.
they bring in these ideas of gender and diversity and inclusiveness
Yes.
and again, it takes these situations and it sort of makes them into like a therapy session led by somebody who is not a licensed therapist on
Hmm.
topics that go beyond what I would consider the purview of the school and into what parents should be doing.
Right.
Like my son, he's 8 years old. And So we're getting to that age where it's like more like, okay, you know, mommy has some of her private places and you have some of your private places, right? Like if my door is closed, then you need to knock in order to come in. And, if you're going to the bathroom, and I'm, taking a shower, mostly it's because like I like to have a minute to myself. Like it's not even like mostly about like, not wanting him to see me yet, but um these are things that I feel like a child and a parent sort of learn and how to work out and like what is private and like what you do in the home versus what you do in public and you know just and again, like, they're little kids, so you only have to do so much, right? You just be like,
Right.
"Oh, you know, girls and boys have different parts." Like, we don't have to go into super details, and as they
Yeah,
get older, once a girl is approaching the age when she's starting to get her period, then you have to have a different conversation.
exactly. And I think it should honestly be up to the parents to decide when these conversations should be had. Like my dad gave me a very like matter of fact conversation at a young age, which I appreciate because I didn't have a mom that was to this day still willing to express have those conversations. But it's not the job of the government. Like no matter how
Right,
crappy these parents are that you feel are slacking or may not be slacking at all, it's not your job to tell them what their kids should know. And what you said about the counselors is very valid because I've seen, I've heard and read lots of stories where a lot of kids who have come into being trans or non-binary had went to their school counselor because they had a separate issue, be it they were sexually abused, they had abuse at home, something traumatic happened, and somehow the answer to that problem was maybe you should transition. And then from there, that like those school therapists and counselors just start to advise actual therapists and stuff. And then before you know it, your kid is going to a therapist that you're not even aware of because in some states they don't got to tell you anything. So
well,
then,
yeah,
yeah.
there's
And
all
they
sorts
can
of
wear
things
whole
happening.
separate clothes at different at school. They can be a whole identity. They could have their name changed. You have no idea. And that's what an important part of being the involved, annoying parent is. Who is my kid talking to? Why is this counselor suddenly close to them? This is why it's so important that we have to be involved in. Everyone has a busy life, but it's
Right.
not an excuse anymore.
I do find often, another sort of like buzzsaw, um, like this Kafka method that they use, they're like, "Do it or else,"
Mhm.
is so the one was the suicide, but another one is, vulnerable or homeless youth. They'll say, "Well, these children are very, they need support, or they don't have good parents, so we have to keep this secret from them and stuff."
Yeah,
And and again, there's so many things going on there. It's like, okay, well, if they don't have a good family, like their family is going to do something that is illegal because they say that they are, gay or whatever, like have an uncomfortable situation with their gender and they need some support, and their parents are going to do something that you feel so extreme that you can't inform them, like, that's like a whole different level of an issue. That's like not that I'm a huge fan of CPS or like other government agencies, but that's definitely like a child protective services issue and like, maybe even a police issue if there's some abuse going on there or something. So it's like they just again they conflate a bunch of different problems there.
yeah,
Um and I certainly think that vulnerable youth need support and, on a case by case basis, there might be something that you need to do for a child who doesn't have as much support at home as a child who does, right? As a trusted teacher, again, it's like you want kids to have trusted adults, but they take these terms and then they just like twist them and you're like,
yeah. Like you can't apply all the same terms to the same people. Like, yeah, there are kids that unfortunately do live in families who wouldn't be accepting of them being gay or whatever the case may be. But if it gets to that point, that's when you step in. Where if there is abuse happening, if they do go home and say something and something happens, that's when you act. You don't
right,
pre-act before anything happens. You don't listen to a kid who will automatically listen to them and be like, "Hey, my parents are going to hate me." Who knows? Are you in their home? The kid is coming to you out of worry because naturally, if a child has a secret or something they feel is hard to express, it's going to be disastrous to them no matter what. Even if they go and tell their parent and everything is fine, in their mind, it's automatically disastrous. So we're running with that. We're like, oh yeah, we don't have to tell any parents anything. So to prevent all of that, we're just not going to say anything. And
Right,
it's
yeah.
just like,
Like, it's a
what
whole
do you
kid's world.
mean?
It's like their whole world, right? Their whole identity, they're trying to figure out who they are, and of course you want to make your parents happy, and if you've been keeping a secret from them or whatever, then yeah, you're gonna be like, "My parents aren't gonna be too happy about this thing," or
And you're teaching them how to keep secrets. Remember when we were taught that
right,
only predatory adults to teach you to keep secrets? It's
right,
exactly what you're doing. You're telling them it's okay. So what other secret are they holding from them? Like, no one is really thinking this through, but it's because unfortunately predators have infiltrated this whole thing.
right.
They found the perfect in.
Right,
And
and then even people who aren't predators, like we said before,
yeah,
they're especially teachers are, like, super empathetic people,
yeah,
like, they wanna help, they wanna be there for people, and I think a lot of times people who really wanna help people can do the most damage,
yeah.
right? Because
How
they're just, like, overly caring, and then when you're using too much emotion, you don't think
yeah.
critically, right?
Hell is paved with good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good everyone. I don't believe these teachers are just all predators. Absolutely not. I believe they went to those workshops and they had those kids in those classrooms and they're like, yeah, this sounds like this would be fine. I could totally, I could be my student's friend. I can make sure that it's a safe space here. Yeah, in theory, of course, you want your classroom to be safe. Of course, you want your kids to feel comfortable, but we all have to take a step back and look like at what cost are we really doing that? Like, what are we
Right,
disrespecting other relationships in their kids' lives? Are we affecting their life negatively? Like, not everything that sounds good is good,
right.
unfortunately.
And I do think at the higher levels, there's definitely a monetary incentive,
Oh
right? For some people who maybe, they don't really know about gender ideology either way, but they stand to make a profit from it somehow. And then I do think that people like John Money, who are seeding this into the culture, and there are like predators at the highest levels.
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Making policy, running some of these companies, some of these nonprofit organizations that are putting out this content. It gets super dark and deep. And I know a lot of this stuff gets twisted into different conspiracy theories, right? There's all sorts of, I mean, the biggest one I can think of is Q, but there's all sorts of different offshoots of these, you know, uh, elite classes and their pedophilia practices, and I'm not sure to what extent I believe these ones are that ones. I think a lot of times, these obscure conspiracies often are used to distract you from the things that we were talking about, like, on this podcast, and things that we can all sort of be like, "Okay, like, there's actually evidence to support this. These are, like, real things that are really going on, and if we have this conversation, maybe we can actually move forward rather than some of these more obscure things that may or may not be true to whatever extent."
yeah.
So,
People like to latch it into like major conspiracy theories, like, but the only factual things we know is that there's non-government organizations that work with government organizations to create these laws, which is just facts. There's trans activist groups that lobby certain politicians, and they jump onto to these um to these laws, and they think, hey, yeah, this is going to be great because I support you support it's the part of the cause, and I'm getting funding for this.
right,
And that's where kind of where it all kind of stems from, people's greed. um and who's pushing these ideologies, you can go into whatever you want to go into, but
right, right.
usually
I
these organizations are
It
being
gets
funded
very
by yeah,
distracting, I think
that's
sometimes
distracting.
when you get
But
too far down the rabbit
yeah,
hole, like, I'm not saying there's not a place for that
Yeah,
anywhere. I'm not saying some of that stuff isn't true, but I think that it's the better conversation to have if we're gonna build like a broad, moderate coalition of people to
is.
really push back against this in your everyday life. This is the conversation that we need to be having. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on, sharing your stuff. Can do you have any events coming up where people can find you? You know, plug your social media. Let us know what's
Yeah.
going on.
So my Instagram is Black Hippie Life. You can find me on there. I also run the GAG New York page. So if you can't find me on there, you can find me through that. There is a protest happening on what's it tomorrow? Oh my God, tomorrow at Elmhurst Library. It's going to be a drag queen story hour protest. I'm doing it a little different this time. Some people may know like the Charlie Kirk table and like change my mind.
Uh huh.
I will be having a little table with just some brochures and like my little posters, and I'll just be sitting
Okay.
there
That
reading a little
reminds
book.
me of the billboard
Billboard Chris, yeah.
yeah, Billboard Chris, how he goes with his billboard and just tries to have conversations. I think that's a great tactic,
Yeah,
right?
I kinda got that idea from 2 protests ago. Was ignoring the other side, going crazy, and I, like, just saw members of the community walking around confused, looking at me like, "What's happening?" And I'm like, "Here's the tea. Like, this is what's
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is." I pulled out a book that's being read, and then parents were like, "Oh my god, this is what's happening." And I'm like, "Yeah, this is what's happening." Even had a little kid, not little kid, but, teenager join our side because he's like, "Yeah, I'm learning this in school. Like, this is what's really going on."
yeah.
And that's how we change things. You build connections in
Exactly. You
community.
have to
Don't have to
have
argue.
conversations.
Don't argue with this side. Don't worry about what they're doing. Its focus needs to be on educating people when you have the opportunity. You can do that at a
Right.
protest. So
Yeah, because you see a lot of the videos that happen at these drag queen story hours. I mean, I'm most familiar with the ones in New York City because I'm right here, and they get intense, they get heated, and I don't always know if that's the most productive thing to do. Like, I really appreciate the people that are consistently going out there and raising awareness about these things, but I think that your, pivot to this tactic is very smart, and
mm,
I think that if you can help sort of get other people who like to show up to these things to take more of these tactics, that in the long run you'll be more successful. And also I think that it just puts out a more positive image,
yeah,
right? Than just like that
absolutely.
adrenaline rush you get of like going to get like in the Antifa guy's face or whatever.
Yeah, like that. Like great. You're arguing with somebody. I've argued too. But at the end of the day, you can't let your emotions get the best of you to the point where you're ignoring where you're there. You're there to educate. You're there to hopefully change one parent's mind from going inside. There's just one thing you're there for. You're not there for them. You're there for the kids. And if you
All right,
keep
so
that
if
in
you're in New
mind,
York City tomorrow,
no, no,
what area? The Elmhurst area? Elmhurst, Queens, you said?
it's gonna be in the Elmhurst Library.
Okay, if you're
So yeah,
New York City, Elmhurst Library, go head out, check out Amaya there, and go see her over on Instagram at the Gays Against Groomer New York page. Also, she's at Black Hippie Life, and check out all the stuff she's doing. Again, I appreciate you coming through.
thank you.
Appreciate everybody who checked in live, who's checking in on the replay. Again, make sure you've hit that like button. Share this one out with your friends. They need to know this history. They need to know how it's impacting our kids, and they need to know how they can take action, which you can get all three of those things nice and conveniently in this video. So until next time, I love all your beautiful faces out there. And remember, think free, live free,